In the year 612 CE, the largest army in the history of the world marched out of China. 1.13 million soldiers, more than 2 million support workers, cooks, engineers, blacksmiths, wagon drivers, following behind them. The column stretched so long that when the first soldiers reached the front, the last soldiers had not yet left the capital. They were marching to conquer Korea, and it was going to be an absolute catastrophe. The man who ordered this campaign was Emperor Yang of the Sui Dynasty, and he was already in the middle of the most ambitious construction project in human history. He had just conscripted 5.5 million workers to dig a canal connecting China's two great rivers. He had conscripted 2 million more to build a new imperial capital from scratch. He had conscripted another 1 million to rebuild the Great Wall, all at the same time. And now he was sending 1 million soldiers to invade Korea. Here's the extraordinary thing about Emperor Yang. Everything he built, the canal, the roads, the new capital, became the foundation of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. The Tang Dynasty that came after him used his canal to feed their empire for 300 years. Merchants used his roads for 600 years. The canal itself is still in use today, 1,400 years after he dug it. Emperor Yang built everything that made China great, and he destroyed himself in the process. This is the story of the emperor who gave everything to the future and bankrupted the present. To understand Emperor Yang, you have to understand what China was before him. For nearly 400 years after the Han Dynasty collapsed in 220 CE, China was fragmented. The Yellow Turban Rebellion we covered in another video sparked that collapse, and what followed was 4 centuries of competing kingdoms, warlords, invasion from the north, and political chaos. China's population plummeted. Cities were abandoned. Farmland returned to wilderness. By the 500 SCE, people had simply grown up not knowing what a unified China even looked like. Then came Emperor Yang's father, Emperor Wen of Sui. In 589 CE, Emperor Wen reunified China after 369 years of division. He was a brilliant administrator. He lowered taxes, reformed the law code, abolished the aristocratic monopoly on government jobs, and introduced examinations so that talented commoners could serve the empire. He stored grain in massive granaries across the empire, a safety net against famine. He left his son a China with full treasuries, working institutions, and 50 million people who were genuinely optimistic about the future. It was, by any measure, the best possible inheritance. Yang Guang, the man who would become Emperor Yang, was Emperor Wen's second son. That was a problem. The crown prince, the heir to the throne, was his older brother Yang Yong. For a decade, Yang Guang ran what might be the most patient Khan in Chinese history. In public, he dressed simply, lived austerely, avoided beautiful women, and cultivated a reputation for Confucian virtue. In private, he was throwing lavish parties and building a secret luxury compound. Gradually, very gradually, Yang Guang began poisoning his father's mind against the crown prince. He arranged for stories to reach the emperor about Yang Yong's excesses, his debaucheries, his unfitness to rule. He made sure that every comparison between the two sons landed in his favor. In 600 CE, Emperor Wen stripped Yang Yong of his title as crown prince. Yang Guang replaced him. 4 years later, Emperor Wen fell ill. What happened next is disputed, but the official Sui history strongly implies that Yang Guang had his father killed, and then had his brother Yang Yong executed for good measure. He ascended the throne in 604 CE as Emperor Yang. Now, if you inherited the most powerful empire in the world after eliminating your father and brother, you might expect to take things easy for a while. Consolidate power. Let the empire breathe. Enjoy the palaces. Emperor Yang did not take things easy. Emperor Yang immediately launched the largest public works program China had ever seen. The scale of what he attempted in just the first 5 years of his reign is almost impossible to comprehend. First, a new eastern capital. The old capital, Chang'an, was in the northwest, close to the ancient heartland, but far from the increasingly wealthy and productive south. Emperor Yang decided he needed a second capital at Luoyang, in the center of China, where the rivers converged and commerce flowed. 2 million workers were conscripted. 1 million households, entire families, were forcibly relocated to populate the new city. The palace complex he built there included the Shiwan Garden, artificial mountains, artificial lakes, 120 pavilions, exotic animals brought from every corner of the empire, and thousands of entertainers. It took less than a year to build, because he made 2 million people build it at maximum speed. Second, the Grand Canal. China's two great rivers, the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze River in the south, ran roughly parallel to each other but had no connection. The north was China's political and military center. The south was China's agricultural and economic center. Without a way to move grain from south to north efficiently, maintaining a large army in the north was a constant logistical nightmare. Emperor Yang's solution: connect them with a canal. The Grand Canal was not entirely new. Sections of it had existed for centuries in small, disconnected pieces. But Emperor Yang did not extend the canal. He transformed it. He conscripted 5.5 million workers for the Beyond Canal section alone, the central link connecting the Yellow River to the Huai River. He demanded they work through summer heat, without adequate food, at a pace that was simply not survivable for many of them. Traditional sources claim that half the workers on some sections died. Their bodies were buried in the canal banks. A later Song Dynasty record noted the canal was, quote, built on corpses. When it was finished, the Grand Canal stretched 1,764 kilometers. Let me give you a sense of how long that is. That is longer than the distance from London to Istanbul. At its widest point, the canal was 40 meters across, wide enough to sail large grain barges. It connected the Yellow River, the Huai River, the Yangtze River, and was later extended north toward Beijing and south to Hangzhou. For the first time in Chinese history, grain from the Yangtze Delta could be shipped directly to armies stationed in the north. The canal transformed China's logistics, and therefore China's military capability, permanently. Third project, the Great Wall. The existing Great Wall was in terrible condition after centuries of neglect and fragmentation. In 607 CE, Emperor Yang conscripted 1 million workers to repair and extend it. 200,000 of them died. The following year, he conscripted another million. If you are keeping count, this means that in the first few years of his reign, Emperor Yang was simultaneously running at least 3 massive construction projects: the new capital, the canal, and the Great Wall, each of which required 1 million or more workers. Where were all these workers coming from? From the farms. Chinese peasants, who paid taxes in grain and owed labor service to the state, were the labor force for every imperial project. But farms require the people who farm them to be present at planting time and harvest time. When millions of farmers were marched away to dig canals and build walls, the fields went unplanted or unharvested. When the fields went unplanted, there was no grain. When there was no grain, there was famine. Emperor Yang was consuming the empire's human capital at a rate the economy simply could not sustain. And yet, in the short term, it worked. The Grand Canal was a genuine logistical miracle. Emperor Yang used it immediately and enthusiastically, sailing south on a fleet of dragon boats. Massive, ornate vessels, some with 4 decks, pulled by teams of conscripted men walking along the canal banks. The flotilla reportedly stretched 65 kilometers from front to rear. He brought the entire court with him. Tens of thousands of officials, musicians, entertainers, concubines, guards. While peasants starved along the canal banks, Emperor Yang floated past on a floating palace. To understand why this felt like such a betrayal to ordinary people, you have to understand Confucian political theory. In the Chinese political tradition, the emperor ruled because heaven approved of him, what was called the mandate of heaven. If the emperor governed well, heaven showed its approval through good harvests, stable weather, and prosperity. If the emperor governed badly, heaven withdrew its mandate, and showed this through floods, famines, and rebellions. A famine was not just suffering, it was a sign, a message. And by 610 CE, the messages were beginning to arrive. But here's what makes Emperor Yang truly unique in Chinese history. He knew all of this. He was not stupid. He was not oblivious. He was a genuine intellectual, a poet, a musician, a man who could hold his own with Confucian scholars. He understood that the suffering his projects caused was politically dangerous. He simply, and this is the key to understanding him, believed the long-term strategic necessity outweighed the short-term human cost. The canal would pay for itself 100 times over. The new capital would anchor China's center of gravity. The Great Wall would secure the frontier. He was right about all of it. He was also wrong about whether the empire could survive the price of being right. Now we come to Korea. Goguryeo, the Northern Korean kingdom, was one of the most formidable military powers in East Asia. It occupied the Northern Korean peninsula and extended into what is now Manchuria, controlling mountain fortresses that had repelled every previous Chinese attempt to conquer them. For Emperor Yang, Goguryeo was a strategic irritant. Goguryeo was allied with the Turks in the north, another power China needed to manage. Leaving Goguryeo unconquered while rebuilding the empire meant leaving a potential enemy at the back door. In 612 CE, Emperor Yang launched the First Korean Campaign. The army he assembled was, at 1.13 million soldiers, the largest in Chinese history to that date. The logistics supporting this army, food, weapons, equipment, fodder for horses, required another 2 million workers and hundreds of thousands of carts and boats. The plan was straightforward. A multi-pronged attack converging on Pyongyang, the Goguryeo capital, while simultaneously besieging the fortress of Liaodong as a forward base. The plan immediately ran into reality. The fortress of Liaodong refused to fall. Emperor Yang's commanders besieged it for months. The Goguryeo defenders held. Every time it looked like the fortress was about to surrender, the Goguryeo king sent negotiators asking for terms, just long enough to resupply the defenders, and then broke off negotiations. Emperor Yang, following proper protocol, always had to accept negotiators and pause the assault. He was being played. Meanwhile, a separate force of 305,000 soldiers marched directly on Pyongyang, ordered by Emperor Yang to attack without waiting for resupply, to live off the land, to take the capital by shock and speed. This was a logistical impossibility. The commander of the Goguryeo forces, General Yulji Mundeok, understood this immediately. He deliberately retreated, drawing the Chinese army deeper and deeper into Goguryeo territory, stretching their supply lines to the breaking point. By the time the Chinese forces reached the Salsu River, the Chongshan River in modern North Korea, they were starving, exhausted, and hundreds of kilometers from support. At the Salsu River, General Yulji Mundeok struck. The Battle of Salsu was a massacre. Of the 305,000 soldiers who had marched on Pyongyang, just 2,700 returned. More than 300,000 men dead in a single campaign. When the survivors staggered back to Chinese lines, Emperor Yang ordered the retreat. The First Korean Campaign had achieved nothing and cost 300,000 lives. But here is what did not happen after this catastrophe. Emperor Yang did not stop. In 613 CE, he launched the Second Korean Campaign. He personally led the army this time. The fortress of Liaodong was once again under siege, once again close to falling, when a message arrived from the rear. A major rebellion had broken out in China. Yang Xuangan, one of Emperor Yang's own senior officials, the son of a man who had helped build the Sui Dynasty, had revolted. Emperor Yang had to abandon the siege and rush home. The Second Korean Campaign also achieved nothing. In 614 CE, Emperor Yang launched the Third Korean Campaign. At this point, Goguryeo was also exhausted. 3 years of war had drained both sides. The Goguryeo king sent envoys offering nominal submission. Not real submission, not tribute, not territorial concessions, just the words. Emperor Yang accepted. He declared victory. He went home. Everyone knew it was not a victory. 3 campaigns. Hundreds of thousands dead. Nothing gained. By 614 CE, the empire was coming apart. The causes were interlocking. Military conscription had drained villages of adult males for 3 consecutive years of Korean campaigns, on top of years of canal and construction labor. Famine had spread across the north. Tax collection had collapsed because there was nothing to tax. Men who fled conscription, because the penalty for desertion was death, but at least you had a chance of surviving, became bandits. Those bandits attracted other desperate men. Those bandit groups became rebel armies. The rebel leaders came from every social class. Du Jiande was a farmer who had lost his father to conscription labor. He went from local strongman to warlord to king of an independent state in northern China in less than 5 years. Zhu Yuanlong was a county official who decided that his county's survival required independence from an empire that was demanding more than it could give. And then there was Lai Yuan. Li Yuan was a Sui aristocrat. In fact, he was a cousin of Emperor Yang. He served as governor of Taiwan in the north. And he watched the empire dissolve with the calculating eye of a man who understood opportunity. In 615 CE, Emperor Yang suffered the most personally humiliating episode of his reign. He was traveling in the north when a Turkic army, led by Khagan Shibi, surrounded him and his entire court at the town of Yanmen. For months, Emperor Yang was trapped. His relief forces eventually broke through, and he escaped. But the image of the Son of Heaven, trapped in a town, surrounded by steppe nomads, waiting to be rescued, was devastating. The mandate of heaven was visibly gone. After Yanmen, Emperor Yang never really governed again. He retreated south to Jiangdu, modern Yangzhou, and essentially took up permanent residence in a pleasure palace on the southern bank of the Yangtze. The accounts of his final years describe a man who had accepted that the dynasty was finished, who drank heavily, who surrounded himself with music and beautiful women, and who reportedly told his attendants, "A good head of hair on a beautiful neck. Who cares who holds the knife that cuts it? Let me at least drink some fine southern wine." In the spring of 618 CE, the palace guards at Jiangdu had had enough. They were far from home. The empire was in chaos. Their generals, brothers named Yuan Huaji and Yuan Jiji, organized a mutiny. Emperor Yang was informed of the conspiracy. He reportedly asked only one thing. Could he have a cup of wine before he died? He was given the wine. Then Yuan Huaji strangled him with his own imperial silk sash. Emperor Yang of the Sui Dynasty was 49 years old. The Sui Dynasty collapsed almost immediately. By the end of 618 CE, a dozen different warlords each controlled pieces of what had once been a unified empire. But one of them moved faster than the others. Li Yuan, the governor of Taiwan, marched on Chang'an with his sons at the head of an army. He took the capital in 617 CE, installed a puppet emperor, and then formally declared himself the first emperor of a new dynasty in 618 CE. The Tang Dynasty had begun. Li Yuan's son, Li Shimin, would prove to be one of the greatest rulers in Chinese history. Emperor Taizong. Taizong spent the next decade defeating all the rival warlords and reunifying China. He did it on the infrastructure Emperor Yang had built. The Grand Canal moved grain from the south to feed his armies. The road network moved his cavalry with unprecedented speed. The administrative systems Emperor Wen had created, and Emperor Yang had maintained amid the chaos, still functioned. Emperor Taizong was obsessed with learning from Emperor Yang's failure. He kept a mirror in his chambers and is reported to have said, "A bronze mirror shows you your appearance. History shows you the rise and fall of dynasties. Wise men show you your mistakes. I keep all three." He gathered the most outspoken ministers he could find. Men like Wei Zheng, who famously told him things he did not want to hear, and demanded they criticize him. He reduced taxes. He avoided mega-projects. He listened. What happened to the Grand Canal under the Tang? It became the artery of the empire. Grain barges from the Yangtze Delta moved north continuously, feeding the Tang capital at Chang'an. Merchants discovered that the canal made north-south trade not just possible, but cheap and fast. Cities along the canal, Yangzhou, Suzhou, Hangzhou, became some of the wealthiest places on earth. The Tang Dynasty, which ruled for 3 centuries and created one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization, was in a very real sense powered by Emperor Yang's canal. The canal did not just help the Tang, it helped every dynasty that came after them. The Song Dynasty used it. The Yuan Dynasty, the Mongol rulers of China, extended it and made it even longer. The Ming Dynasty maintained it. The Qing Dynasty relied on it. Even today, portions of the Grand Canal remain active waterways, carrying freight through eastern China. It has been in continuous use for 1,400 years. So what are we to make of Emperor Yang? The traditional Chinese verdict was simple and savage. He was placed in the category of lost mandate emperors, tyrants whose excessive ambition proved that heaven had withdrawn its approval. He was given the posthumous name Yang, a negative designation meaning excessive, specifically to mark him as a warning to future rulers. The Sui Shu, the official history compiled by the Tang Dynasty, portrayed him as a monster, lustful, cruel, arrogant, deaf to wise counsel. But some later historians have complicated that picture. Song Dynasty historian Sima Guang, writing his great history Ziji Tongjian 500 years after Emperor Yang's death, acknowledged that the canal and road network were genuine achievements of enormous long-term value. Modern historians have noted that many of Emperor Yang's projects, the examination system expansion, the legal reforms, the infrastructure, were continued and celebrated by the Tang, not reversed. The canal was not torn down as the work of a tyrant. It was maintained as the gift of a builder. The comparison that keeps coming up in Chinese historiography is the Qin Dynasty. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, also built massive projects using forced labor: the Great Wall, the Lingkou Canal, a vast road network, the Terracotta Army. He also taxed and conscripted his people to the point of collapse. His dynasty lasted only 15 years, replaced by the Han Dynasty, which used his roads and administrative systems to build a 400-year empire. The pattern repeats. The dynasty that exhausts itself building infrastructure gets replaced by the dynasty that uses that infrastructure to flourish. There is a question historians still debate. Was there a version of Emperor Yang's vision that could have succeeded? Could someone have built the Grand Canal without destroying the empire? The answer is probably yes, but it would have taken 3 times as long, moved 3 times more slowly, and required the kind of patience that Emperor Yang simply did not possess. He wanted it done now. He saw the strategic necessity clearly, calculated the cost, and decided the people could pay it. He was wrong. Not about the canal's value, but about the empire's capacity to absorb the price of building it. China's population during the Sui-Tang transition collapsed dramatically. Estimates suggest China went from roughly 46 million people under Emperor Wen to somewhere around 37 million by the time Emperor Taizong stabilized the empire. Nearly 10 million people, killed in construction projects, killed in the Korean campaigns, killed in the civil wars that followed, killed by famine. That is the real cost of Emperor Yang's 14 years, not the canal, not the Korean failures, not the dragon boat tours. 10 million lives. But here is the line I keep coming back to. Emperor Yang built a canal that has been in continuous use for 1,400 years. You can sail on it today. Merchants used his roads for 6 centuries, the Tang Golden Age. Arguably the greatest flourishing of culture, poetry, trade, and cosmopolitan civilization in Chinese history was built on his infrastructure. He destroyed his empire. He built China. And the question his story keeps asking us across 14 centuries is this: what is the difference between a man who builds the future at the cost of the present and a tyrant? Sometimes the answer depends entirely on how long you are willing to wait.